Welcome, everybody. Today's Tuesday, June 21st, and the time is 6:10 p.m. We're here for the work session for the budget workshop of the Coppell City Council. There is a quorum present. We do have 2 members attending by Zoom, and so I will call the meeting to order. Ashley, do we have anybody signed up for citizens' appearance? All right, so before you do that, persons wishing to speak must sign the... persons wishing to speak must sign the register and list their residence address. Each speaker must state his or her name and their address. Presentations by individuals shall be limited to 2 minutes each. An individual speaker time may be extended for an additional 2 minutes with approval of the majority of the council. Persons signed up to speak will be called in order that they signed up. No personal attacks by any speaker shall be made against any member of the council, the mayor, individual, group, or corporation. There will be no comments or deliberations from the city council due to the requirements of the Texas Open Meetings Act. Once the timer sounds at 2 minutes, the city secretary will cut or break in and make the request to the mayor and the city council to extend the time if they choose. We have one person signed up to speak. Is it, sir? Yes, sir. Name and address, and the microphone is yours.
My name is Billy Dillon. I live at 951 Sugarberry in Coppell. I'm an active member of the Senior Center here in Coppell since 2009. I've lived in Coppell since 1983. I come here this evening to ask for the consideration of building a standalone pickleball facility on the Senior Center grounds. Pickleball is currently the fastest growing sport in the United States. We have many seniors in the city of Coppell who are very active and would like to play the sport. A climate control facility would be best for seniors. Coppell seems to be falling behind on indoor pickleball compared to other communities such as Grapevine, Flower Mound, and Louisville, just to mention a couple. I would really enjoy seeing pickleball introduced to all the elementary schools. What better place could there be to start it all than with the older people at the Senior Center here in Coppell? That's it.
Thank you very much for your comments. Ashley, was that the end of our... All right, thank you very much. So item number 3 is an introduction of the general fund and debt service fund. Ms. Leach.
Over here, sir.
There you go.
Yes. All right, well, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm very pleased to be here today to introduce our workshop tonight. Up until this point, we've kind of talked about the appetizers, the bread, the salad. Tonight, we're really going to get into the meat of our budget with the general fund. I want to share with you a couple things about how we got to this place and preview the context and the overarching principles and guidelines and assumptions that have shaped the proposed budget that's presented to you today. So we sometimes refer to Coppell as the bubble, and we like to think of that as a place in which things that are happening in the outside of that bubble don't necessarily impact us here inside the bubble. And unfortunately, that is not the case as it relates to the things happening out there in the world, the state, and at the regional level. We are dealing with many of the same challenges and impacts of things like inflation, supply chain issues, the Great Resignation, workforce pressures on recruitment and retention, and legislative changes to local autonomy related to revenues and our tax rate. Despite all of these challenges, this staff has been very diligent in preparing a budget for your consideration that recognizes and adjusts to these challenges. And I'm really proud of the budget that is before you tonight, just knowing the environment in which this has been developed. So what you will see tonight is a balanced and responsible budget that ensures that the level of service that we are enjoying today is what we will see into the next fiscal year. Kim will be sharing with you our revenue picture and walking through our debt service. And Tamara will be walking through our expenditures and primarily hitting the 4 drivers that are driving the increases that you will see in your budget. And they're going to be easy to spot because the percentages are large compared to the others. So we are in our combined services. We will be activating the sales tax planning that the council has embarked upon over the past 2 years to advance fund our fleet and ES replacement. In our fire department, we will see some increases related to required FLSA overtime and step-up requirements as we transition to a 14-day payroll cycle, as well as some capital items. In our police department, that increase will be related to the transition of police officers from our crime control district to our general fund. And then we will also, in all of the departmental budgets, we will be implementing the results of our compensation study. So once you account for the fleet and the Enterprise Solutions equipment transfer, our total overall budget increased 3% from the fiscal year amended, so our current year amended budget. And that's one of the reasons I'm really proud of all the work that went into this, because we are living right now in an inflationary environment of 8.6%. And so we certainly did not get to this place with alone. And so this really has been in partnership with council. So you all have set us on a really great path in terms of approving the strategy on our sales tax response. That's provided a tremendous amount of flexibility to be able to respond. And our team, as I've mentioned, they've spent countless hours scrubbing and reviewing every component of our operation to identify how we can be smarter and more efficient to deliver service to our community. So the budget before you was developed using 3 key parameters. The first of which recognizes the fluidity and the uncertainty around the appraisal process for both the commercial and the residential properties, and its impact on the tax rate as it relates to the constraints from SB 2. The second thing is that we have built this budget around an assumption that we are operating as if Rule 3.334 is in effect. We are now going into our 3rd year of scaling our services and personnel to meet this new revenue environment. And so at this point, we really have a pretty good idea about what's sustainable and what is not. So in the proposed budget, there are 2 new positions proposed. One is in our Enterprise Solutions Department, and one is in our Code Compliance Division in Community Development. Both positions would bring those departments and that division back to its pre-rule staffing of several years ago. So we have attempted to operate without those positions for the past 2 years, and we are now at a point where it has become clear that we can no longer sustain service levels without those additions. And while we're talking about those 2 positions, that story is really playing out in a number of different departments as we start getting a much better understanding about what it takes to provide the level of service that we see today. The last thing that has shaped our budget is around safeguarding the future through recruiting and retaining top talent. So this budget reflects the commitment to ensuring that the city is within the top third of the municipal market in the Metroplex, which is consistent with our compensation philosophy. The compensation study has been completed, and the proposed budget reflects the salary adjustments necessary to balance regional competitiveness with financial sustainability in the long term. We evaluated 17 of our competitor communities around the Metroplex and found that today we are in the bottom third of that cohort group. Making no changes or only adjusting for annual merit and step increases will result in us falling further behind the market next year as it relates to our market position. We believe the adjustments included in the proposed budget will allow us to compete to recruit and retain the best employees to meet the expectations of service of our community. So post-COVID, and this is something that you all are experiencing in your workplace as well. So post-COVID, everything has changed around the global workforce. And if we are to remain competitive in terms of making Coppell the place that you want to be, both from a resident standpoint and from an employee standpoint, we must adjust. So if you look at our website, we have 23 positions that are advertised right now. And for a workforce of over 300 FTEs, that doesn't necessarily sound like a lot of vacancies right now. However, there are areas in our operation where the concentration of the vacancies has had a service impact. For example, so we have our finance team with us today. They have vacancies in a third of their positions. 2 of those positions are in the budget. And so if you'll recall, last year we had 4 staff members helping us through the budget. There were 4 people sitting at that table over there. There are 2 this year. The Parks Operation team is down the equivalent of an entire crew. The Fleet Division is down to 2 technicians to maintain a fleet of over close to 200 pieces of equipment and vehicles. So I say all of that not to bemoan where we are in terms of our employment, or to paint a picture that we're the only employees who are facing these pressures on recruitment and retention. Our teams are they're very resilient, and they're dedicated to the current level of service that's reflected in the budget before you tonight. The ability to absorb new projects and expanded scopes of work is no longer a proposition that we can guarantee. It's the long-term sustainability of our staffing capacity that is concerning and has become in consideration as we shape this budget. So I want to thank council in advance for all of the work that you've done up to this point and for the time that we're going to invest moving forward as you consider the information related to the budget development process. While we are not requiring any decisions of you tonight, we do look forward to your feedback in terms of anything that you have regarding the budget, knowing that we will get back together on the general fund at the end of July once we have the appraised values in from the appraisal districts. So at this time, I'd like to hand the presentation off to Kim, who'll go over the revenues.
Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before I dive into the revenue information in the packet, I would like to take a few minutes to provide an overview of things to keep in mind as we talk about property values, the property tax rate, and the property tax bill. So first, I'd like to begin this evening by sharing where we're at in the process. This slide shows that the appraisal district will not have the certified values to us until July 25th. So that means that we're very early in the process regarding taxable values and determining the tax rate. We will, again, as Tracy said, meet on the July 28th to provide the certified taxable value and share the tax rate based on that certified value. Remember that the maintenance and operation, or the M&O portion of the tax rate, can grow no more than 3.499%, meaning that the maintenance and operation property tax revenue can only increase by 3.499%, which is less than the inflation that we're seeing today. Next, you'll see on the slide that on August 5th, Dallas County Tax Assessor will calculate the city's tax rate, and the city will publish notices concerning that tax rate. Then, on August 9th, we will hold the public hearing on the budget and the tax rate, and at that same meeting, council will vote on the adoption of the budget, then the adoption of the tax rate, and then ratification of the tax rate. The last step then occurs in October, which is when the tax assessor mails out the tax bills. Next, I would like to provide a refresher on the seesaw effect. It's important to remember that as values go up, the tax rate comes down. So the impact of an increase in taxable property values is that a lower tax rate will generate the same amount of revenue. If we were experiencing a decrease in values, then the tax rate would need to increase, or the tax rate would increase to generate the same amount of property tax revenue. This next slide shows that the total tax rate, again, has an M&O, or maintenance and operation rate, and the INS rate. The M&O portion of the tax rate generates the revenue that is used to provide police, fire, animal services, building inspections, neighborhood integrity services, the Corps, the tennis center, youth camps, maintaining our parks, the senior center, the biodiversity center, the library, public works services such as traffic control and maintenance of city facilities and infrastructure, as well as the cost experienced by typical businesses, for example, human resources, IT, finance, and management. The INS portion of the tax rate is used to repay the principal and interest on outstanding bonds. Bonds allow us to pay for things like road construction and facilities. For example, bonds were issued for the fire station, and it allows us to pay for those items over a period of time, much like having a mortgage. So now that I've provided a review of some foundational concepts related to governmental budgets, I'd like to move into the information that's in your packet. And I'll start with the information on page 2, which is the valuation breakdown report. So this page has a lot of information on it. However, I'd like you to focus on the columns with the 2 red circles. This is the 2022 preliminary certified taxable values as of May 26th. It shows that certified taxable values are $10,116,838,238. And this is the next circle, about almost a $1.4 million increase in values, or 15.81% from the prior year. We have not seen increases like this since the mid to late 90s, when Coppell was growing, and the increases were related to new construction. Based on the preliminary taxable values, commercial properties make up 47% of taxable value, and residential makes up 53%. Last year, commercial made up 45% and residential was 55%. So we've seen a slight switch in the allocation. Remember that the taxable value of residential properties with homestead exemptions can only increase 10% and no more each year. However, commercial properties do not have that same limitation. So, what's a good estimate to use for the growth rate? On page 3 in your packet is a valuation growth rate analysis.
So Kim, I'm sorry, I have
Yes,
a
sir.
question. On the 11.68% that was the residential rate or increase, that's the 10% cap by the state, plus where did the other 1.6% come from?
Well, you have some new construction. So new construction can grow at whatever, it's at whatever market is. It's not capped at the 2% the first time it's put on the roll.
And also those properties that may not have a homestead exemption, is that correct?
Correct. Rental properties do not have a homestead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the analysis shown on page 3 shows the average 30-year decline, the highest decline, and the lowest decline in value between preliminary values and then the certified values that we receive in July. For the budget, we are using a growth rate of 9.39%, which is based on the 30-year average decline. This is higher than the anticipated value increase that we discussed in March and April when we were talking about the exemption changes. The growth rates that we are seeing are very different from what we have experienced over the last 4 years when we were seeing a declining growth rate. For example, the growth rate was 8.44% in 2018. It was 5.99% in 2019. It then dropped to 4.27% in 2020 and 4.15% in 2021. Page 4 in your packet shows the estimated tax rate based on taxable values growing at a 9.39% growth rate and a 3.499% increase in the maintenance and operations property tax revenue. That page also shows a breakout of the tax rate between the M&O and the INS. Page 5 shows the same information, but for the no new revenue tax rate, which would generate the same maintenance and operations property tax revenue as in the current year. So we have not received the official tax rate calculations. So again, the information on pages 4 and 5 are not official and are preliminary estimates based on incomplete taxable property value data. So what's the estimated impact on the city's portion of a residential property tax bill based on the average home value of a homestead and an over 65? This slide shows that the average residential tax bill for fiscal year 2022 based on fiscal year 2022 taxable property values and the fiscal year 22 tax rate of 58 cents, so what people paid this year for property taxes, compared to the estimated average residential tax bill based on fiscal year 23 preliminary taxable property values, using a 0.525079 tax rate, which is the tax rate necessary to provide the 3.499% increase in property tax revenue for the M&O portion. The box on the left is the property with the homestead exemption only. The box on the right is for an over 65 property owner. So the average residential tax bill is lower by $9.92 for a homestead-only property owners, and it's $99.04 lower for an over 65 property owner. The tax bill is lower, even though values have increased, because the INS tax rate needed to pay the principal and interest on outstanding bonds decreased. And that decrease is the result of council directing staff to use the proceeds from the North Lake property sale to defease the bonds related to that property and the fact that the city did not issue more debt in the current year. So based on the estimated values, this is reducing the tax rate needed for the debt by about 2 cents. So I'm going to stop there and ask, are there any questions about the preliminary assessed value, the estimated growth rate, or the tax bill comparison?
Is this reflected in our packet anywhere?
This is not reflected in your packet.
Okay, thank you. I was going crazy trying to find it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, then I'd like to move to page 7 and 8 of your packet. These pages provide you a list of revenue sources of the general fund and shows the amount being budgeted for each revenue source. So property taxes, which is the blue piece of the pie, are budgeted based again on the 3.499% rate previously presented, and this revenue source represents 64% of total revenues, or about $42.7 million. The next area, large area, is sales tax. Sales tax is represented by the red piece of the pie, and it's about 18% of total revenues, or about $11.9 million. We continue to budget sales tax as if the Rule 3.334 is in effect. Based on some additional analysis and the rising prices, we are budgeting an increase in sales tax revenue. So property taxes and sales tax makes up about 82% of revenues of the general fund. The remaining 18% is made up of charges of services, court fines, licenses and permits, franchising fees, and miscellaneous other revenue. So I'd like to point out a couple of changes. So for these other pieces of the pie, we're expecting revenue from anything related to building in Coppell to decrease. Speaking with the Director of Community Development, Coppell has very little vacant land, and they're seeing a reduction in the remodeling that took place in 2020 while everyone was working from home. In addition, as Tamara mentioned last Thursday, the E911, the PEG, and the public education revenues were moved to separate special revenue funds. These revenue sources are restricted in how they can be used, so the accounting for those in a special revenue is appropriate. In addition, any corresponding expenditures would also be recorded in those funds. So the last thing I'd like to point out, and as Tamara mentioned last Thursday when she talked about the CRDC, the general fund is not receiving the 35% transfer of sales tax from CRDC in this fiscal year. We eliminated that. So that is my presentation regarding revenues, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Bijou?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 7,
Yes, sir.
on FY23 budget proposed, sales tax is 13.3 million. Right below that, it says 1.5 million in brackets. Can you explain what's that?
Yes, historically, we've shown sales tax net of any rebates that we provide to the companies. This year, we chose to show you gross sales tax, and then we're showing you the rebates that we anticipate the businesses will receive back.
And that 11.899 million is reflected on the next page with the 18.25%. Is that the?
That's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Who had their hand up? Don.
Thank you. Just to be clear, so you said that 35% that usually comes from CRDC from sales tax will not be coming this year.
Correct.
So I guess how are we making up that gap? We are not receiving that revenue, so are we adjusting expenditures, or are we?
Correct.
We're probably didn't find another revenue source. Is that correct?
Correct. And it amounted to about $689,000 last year. So
we just took care of it
Yes,
through
sir.
expenditure side. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now I would like to turn the presentation over to Tamara, who will cover general fund expenditures.
Mayor and Council. If you look on page 13, we will go over the total expenditures for fiscal year 23. Those total expenditures are $77,262,601. As Ms. Tian and Ms. Leach explained, strategies have been put in place to create a relatively slight increase of 3% over the last year's expenditures. The amount in orange on the screen above indicates the amount for the IT and fleet replacement funds. Those funds are assigned fund balance and can be shown on the screen above you. The fund balance for capital fleet at 8.6 million, and the funds for the IT replacement at 3.4 million. Those funds are assigned fund balance and will account as the transfer out to general fund to the respective funds. If you look on page 14 by classifications, our largest portion of our budget is our salary and benefits at 56%. Referring back to the difference between last year and this year, we do see in red above you on the classification pie chart, 20% accounting for those transfers from the assigned fund balance for IT and fleet replacement funds, which consist of the capital and the capital, which is in the green at 1% and on the pie chart for classifications, consisting of the items referred on page 15, which are our capital packages. These are new or over 10,000 items classified by different requests. These are different from the transfers. A few notable divisions we will see changes in are our combined services, ES, fire, and police. If you look above on the chart above you by division or on page 12, you will see the combined services represents 18% of the general government slice, which is shown also in green due to the IT and fleet replacement funds. General fund will transfer out $8.6 million to capital fleet to fully fund all of the vehicles associated with the general fund. General fund will also transfer out $3.4 million to fully fund the IT capital replacement fund. If you look on page 12, ES makes up 5% of the general fund, or on the screen above you, which is in green, the general government slice. Due to the department centralizing their maintenance, software, and other ES services formerly being expended in other divisions, they will also centralize those expenditures to create a total cost scenario that will help provide efficiencies. The main increase for ES is in the computer video maintenance, subscription software, and services. If you look at the fire and life services, it makes up 19% of the public safety slice in blue. Due to increase in overtime, ballistic vest, and rescue equipment replacements, and a $30,000 grant, this makes up the percentage of difference from last year. If you also look in the public safety, you will see the police department makes up 11% of the public safety slice in blue. This is due to help the long-term financial sustainability in the CCPD fund, which consists of the 6 police officers moving to general fund from the CCPD fund. Other increases are due to salary and benefits adjustments. On page 15, the 1% or the green slice above in the classifications consist of our capital outlay. This year, we have 14 packages totaling $876,150. All other departments that you are seeing are less than 5% increase from last year and are due to inflation and/or salary increases. Do you have any questions?
Don?
On page 12, combined services, the 13.9 million, so that's where we have the 12.1 million shift or transfer over, right? That's where that's embedded.
Yes,
So
sir.
if we weren't fully funding that, that other fund this year, let me see how to ask this. I'm assuming that number, a portion of that number would have funded some capital expenditures anyway. Is that correct? Here's what I did. I took $13.9 million and I subtracted 12.1 and came up with 1.8 or something like that, which is substantially down from last year's 3.3. So I'm assuming a portion of that transfer would have been there if we weren't establishing this fully funded.
Correct.
Is that correct?
We
Okay.
do have a transfer from our facility streets and traffic to IMF out of the combined services.
Okay.
As well as if we did not do the fleet capital replacement, we would still see $800,000 in
Okay.
vehicle replacements.
So it would have been the 800 is what we would have seen come out anyway.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
I think I heard you say it, but I need to hear it again just to kind of make it stick. If I go to page 14, looking at the differences between fiscal year 21, 22, and 22, 23, our public safety percentages went down and the general government went up. What was the cause for that?
So the it's because of the combined services.
I think I heard you say you were reclassifying some of the, basically just reallocating from one category to another. Was that basically what happened?
Yes, sir. From the CCPD fund, we did transfer some police officers over into the general fund.
Thank you. Don?
I want to, I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but the replacement funds, can I ask sort of logistically how those work or how they will work? Is that okay? So we earmarked what was it, 10 million for one of them and 5 million for the other out of sales tax in the past. And we've now determined 12.1 combined is going to fully fund both of those funds. Before, we always, like you said, this year we would have spent 876 would have come out of the general fund to go to some of those replacements if we weren't fully funding this. So how is it going to work going forward? We have fully funded these things, these replacement fleets right now. So will the departments still get charged every year? Some, I don't know if we're going to do it on, 5 year, 7 year, or what, some kind of replacement schedule to replenish that fund. Is that how this is set up to work?
You are correct. Would you like to come be my chief accountant?
No.
So we basically, it's depreciating. So
Okay.
if it has a 5-year life, 1/5 would be charged to that department to be able, so we're building that fund back up.
Okay, so we will continually build that back up, so there will always be, the concept is there will always be funds there for these replacements.
Correct. Currently, we have to pay 100% plus that first year's depreciation.
Okay.
Fully funding the capital replacement will allow us to not have to pay up front plus do the depreciation. So we'll just do the depreciation in future years.
Okay. The $15 million, those may have just been guesses originally. So how did we come up with the 12.1 million to fully fund it? Is there, not that we have to get way down in the weeds, but I guess there's some method to that madness on how we came up with those numbers?
Yes, so the fleet department has a fleet schedule that consists of every fleet equipment item that we have. Associated with that is the one that the budget has, which is the items that are still being paid on. So yes, we do have 2 schedules that consist of the same information, and that's how we came up with the number.
Okay. Okay, so fully funding these, at the end of the day, this gives us a good fallback, good cushion going forward that we will always have for these integral pieces of this to run the city. Those will always be there. That's where we really get to by doing this, right?
It really helps with the peaks and valleys of your tax rate,
Okay.
right? Or with the expenditures. It helps
Yep.
keep them more steady rather than in a year that we need to replace a fire truck, which is $1 million, expenditures go up and then it comes back down.
Got it.
Afterwards. So it-
Smooths all that out.
Correct.
So
Okay.
this got started about 10 years ago when we had a $1.2 million blip when we had to replace the large ladder truck.
No. Yep.
And we started the replacement fund at that point to, as Kim said, to smooth it out over time.
Good. Perfect. Thanks.
And by the way, don't apologize for asking questions. This is the time to ask your questions about the budget. This is the time that we have the ability to impact how the budget is done, and it's important to understand what that is going forward. So
So I can keep going?
you can keep going.
I don't have anything else. Thanks.
Brianna?
I have a question on page 13. Is this a good time to ask that?
Yes.
So I know that in the midst of COVID and as we were anticipating right changes in the sales tax collection, we were trimming down in areas where we needed to trim down. I know that, like for example, the senior center was one of them that we had done some of that, and so some of their programming has been cut back. I guess I was under the impression that we were going to try to get back to where we were in some respect. So all that to say is what I see from this, and tell me if I'm wrong, is community programs, senior center, and biodiversity education center had already been cut and were further looking for a decrease in our 23 proposed budget. One, is that correct? And two, why in particular those areas?
I apologize, I have a spreadsheet overload at the moment. Just had that. Go. It's not that one.
I'll help a little bit. while Tracy's
I
looking.
am so sorry.
and
I
That's
literally
okay.
just had that.
Sorry.
in
First of
front
all,
of
the
me.
premise is, we did not go into asking anybody to reduce as far as reductions. What we were looking for is, are there opportunities to still generate particular savings? So those particular operations identified their own cost. There was no instruction from me or the deputy directors or any of the staff to say you're going to make continued reductions. What we said was that we've lived in this environment now for 2+ years, 3 years. And so from an operational standpoint, we want to make sure that we can at least continue to operate where we are today. Then from a inflationary standpoint, instead of just doing a roughly 8 to 9% increase across the board, each of the departments worked with the purchasing agent and they identified their typical purchases. And if their cost went up in that particular line area, they identified that. If their costs remained the same or went down, they identified that area. So to your point about the programs, and I know that John has gone out to the senior center too. From an overall program standpoint, as you know, we just hired a new senior center person. So this person is going to evaluate all our programs to begin with, but we did not say you're going to continue to cut back on programs. It's how do we bring programs back online. So I just want to make sure, because the premise was that if I heard your question correctly, it was that we were requiring reductions, and we're not doing that.
Well,
And I guess I'll stand corrected. I wasn't asking if you had provided direction to them. I wanted to understand why those areas were showing a decrease where the other areas were showing an increase, and how that had come about.
yes, okay, so specifically, so if we can start with senior center, so their decrease is driven by, we moved, so they had previously been budgeting in their facility operations budget for facility cleaning of the kitchen. So we moved that expenditure to facilities. So that was a $16,000 move, so that's why the senior center looks lower than last year. So they are actually restoring some of their programming from current year. And so the reduction you're seeing is really just accounting to put all the facility cleaning into one location in our budget. Community programs, all of those are, that's just, we adjusted training based on the staff that was there. And so we eliminated training that for folks who have left the organization. So there is no reduction in services there. So that was just kind of who we have on staff. And then in the BEC, so that's just a function of moving. So Tamara had mentioned consolidating some of our ES equipment into a single place. And so the reduction that you're seeing there is a function of moving cameras to that location in the ES budget, as well as relying more on our Eagle Scouts to help us with some projects that we had budgeted some small dollars for. So those are the reductions for those three areas specifically. So there was not a reduction in service. So as I mentioned, so the level of service that we are seeing today is what is reflected in your budget. So those reductions really are just about accounting and putting things where we thought they made more sense.
And I presume for the senior center, there's more than just the kitchen, because the 16 plus the 562 doesn't get me to the 590.
Yeah, but that's the biggest piece, right? So
Okay.
yeah, so that's just the net, but service levels we're restoring for some of the areas that had higher demand.
Okay, thank you.
Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Tian to go over the debt service fund.
So page 17 is where the debt service fund information is located. This fund's revenue source is only from the INS portion of the property tax rate, which is set to generate enough revenue to cover the principal and interest payments due in fiscal year 23, which is almost $7.5 million. The principal and interest payments decreased as a result, again, of council's direction to defease the bonds related to the North Lake property once that property was sold. Therefore, the related revenues also decreased, which means the INS tax rate also decreased. The current principal amount of bonds outstanding is $70,400,000, and 65% of these bonds will be paid off by 2032. This fund is relatively straightforward, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
No questions?
Mayor, I'd like to just kind of tag into this. The other night, we were talking about some options that you have related to the debt service. Again, the budget that we're proposing is, based on the 3.499, knowing there's a great amount of latitude that could happen between now and the end of July as far as what the actual numbers come in at. But if you recall, if you go back to page, I think it was, let's say, page 4. And on the bond indebtedness, it's 0.078. I think our current rate right now is closer to about 9 to 10 cents, right? So we're dropping the 2 cents. So a little bit, for those who were on the council at the time, just as a recollection, y'all are contemplating potentially 3 projects. The relocation of Fire Station 1, which this summer Kevin will be making the presentation and you'll ultimately be making that decision. There's also the service center, the modified plan on the service center based on the discussions and the input that we received a few months ago. And then there's Royal, as far as the reconstruction of Royal. And as you know, Royal is the last piece of the major reconstruction in the city of Coppell. Well, the fire station is approximately 10, the service center is approximately 5, and I believe Royal is approximately 19 million. So when you put those 3 together, that's about $34 million, and will be, depending on which decision y'all make, the debt issuance will be sometime in 2023 as far as consideration. The flexibility that you have, and this kind of goes back, so the reason I was referencing that page, it goes back to the page 16, which is on your fund balance page. And Don, you mentioned this a little bit. We had 10 and 5, and we're not using that amount. We have close to, because of the way we've set those funds aside pre-October 1 of 21, we have close to 21, I think, right at 21 million. So there's going to be about $9 million that is undesignated. So when the time comes for considering issuing the debt, as an example, you could choose to pay cash for the fire station and not issue debt. You have other undesignated funds. And then, not to confuse you in any way, shape, or form, recall that but after October 1st, we set aside a separate fund for the sales tax in case the comptroller were to do a clawback. Well, the trial now is not set till January of 23. So we still don't know how they're going to do clawback. I mean, Round Rock is not budgeting the same way that we are, just as an example. They're going ahead and spending those funds. And so when that's all said and done, that set aside is about another $9 million when we take that into account by next January. So come next January, you'll definitely have a minimum of 9 over here. You have the potential of another 9, and I'll call it the clawback, if you will, that we don't really see how they're going to do it, but okay. So when it's time to make that decision, then that leaves you with however you want to structure it. And I'm just using funding Royal as a bonded indebtedness. Well, that would be 1.5 cents on the tax roll, right? So everybody follow me, what Royal could be? So this year, you're because you defease the bond, you're lowering, your starting point on the tax rate is 2 cents lower. You have an ability to be able to move debt over to the general fund if you wanted to. Have the general fund pay for that particular debt. In this case, it's the water sewer. And let's just say that that portion of the debt you want to pay with the debt service fund is 1.5 cents. I'm just using that as an example. And in 23, when this is after you've issued the debt, when the budget is considered, you move the water sewer all back over, then you've got Royal, then you in effect haven't impacted the tax rate. You follow what I'm saying on the debt service side? I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm just saying you had that option for your consideration. And from a decision-making standpoint, you have the entire month of July going into August to just contemplate that, have some further discussion if you'd like to at one of the 2 meetings in July as a work session item if you wanted to do that. Have that discussion on July the 28th, right? So you have flexibility. You have flexibility to pay cash. And in all reality, you could take all 3 of those projects and pay cash for them because of your undesignated fund balance. So I'm not suggesting that you go issue debt. I'm not saying that you don't issue debt. I'm just saying you have some flexibility if you choose that you want to issue debt. So on the debt service side, just to reiterate, the debt service is coming down 2 cents. That's why you saw when she first started talking about what the impact would be on our residents, their tax bill will just be lower. While it may not be that much, it will be lower than what they are paying now. And that's based on the 3.499. So happy to answer any questions. But I indicated to you that I would talk you through some options that you have on the debt service if you want to utilize that tool. Was it about 3 years ago? I guess when we did Beltline 3 or 4 years ago, that's what we did. And that way you were able to balance out the tax rate so you didn't get into lowering the tax rate one year and then bumping it back up. The caveat in this is that was pre-334 and pre-us setting aside a bunch of funds and everything along those lines. That's before SB2. So we had the flexibility under that scenario to do it a little bit differently. Now we don't have that same option, but you do have options in front of you. I would close just by saying that the budget as presented does offer you a tremendous amount of flexibility, and I don't know, Tracy, do you have any closing, or Kim, did you have any closing? No. So this is per the council's discussion in January, per the discussion in August, per the discussion we've had before. I know, John, are you still there? I know there was something that John and I have been communicating back and forth about some options. And just as an FYI, John's not feeling well either. So John, you want me to take the lead on it, or you want to go ahead?
No, Mike, you can go ahead and start and take the lead.
Okay.
I appreciate
All right.
that.
Sure. All right. Back in January during the council retreat, John mentioned the Veterans Memorial, if y'all recall that conversation. And what we said is we would take a look at different options as a way to fund that. Jessica and her team, and by the way, it was put as a priority in the Parks Recreation Plan. They worked with the city of Irving, and Irving gave them a price quote of approximately all-in of $250,000, which I think is light based on some experiences that some folks that we've talked to on some other memorials. But having said that, the Veterans Memorial can be funded out of the hot tax funds. It can be funded out of ARP funds. It can be funded out of the CRDC as a capital improvement. And actually, it can be funded, if you would like, through the general fund and taking some of the funds from the unassigned fund balance. So you have basically 4 pots of money that we could move forward with on that. And this would be one of those times, again, in the development of the budget to say, yeah, we want to make sure we get that added in there. And while I'm not speaking for John because he's not feeling well, I believe that John wants us to include it in the budget. It's just a matter of where you would like us to place it in those various options. And then the planning process itself, it just would start after October 1st, and it would be a work plan item so that you would get it on the work plan as part of the process. So that it's a project that we go forward with. So I will step back from that, Mayor, and there's a hand up.
So I actually had a question on debt service,
Okay.
and we kind of jumped from one to the other.
All right.
So how do you, well, Brianna had her hand up first anyway.
Actually, mine hopefully just a quick question, but does staff have a preference on which pot it should come from?
No, we do not. We do not have a preference. I would rather it not come out of the CRDC because we're trying to keep CRDC as whole as possible.
Well, that's helpful because then that we have 3 to go from rather than
Right.
4. Like, let's consider that. That's why, right? What makes the most sense?
Right.
Kevin?
So just, do you have any further clarification? You said on the price tag, 200,000, but you thought that might be.
Yeah, Irving just did one, and they quoted the 250,000 for theirs.
Okay.
I personally haven't seen the one in Irving, but I know some other cities that have done some monuments, let's just call it that, and that price tag 250 seems light, based on what they've told me, what they've done.
Has staff identified any potential physical locations for the monument?
No, we had, we have not done any more work other than to find out the price. John's expressed an interest on where he would like it to go. We have veterans in the community who we think we should bring to the table and be part of the process. And so I think John even mentioned at the January meeting about a more high profile location that gets seen. And he had talked about Andy Brown East as far as the location goes. But no, we have not progressed beyond where we are right now.
Okay, thank you.
Real quick. John, is that all accurate?
Yeah, so initially when I did bring this up, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Initially when I brought this up, I was talking about using the hot tax funds because I know that we were very limited for the use of the hot tax fund, and this could be I thought that this could be something that you could use as a place where people could visit, and for that purpose. And I had mentioned to Mike also about this where. When I visited Memorial Plazas, different places, it really makes no sense when you put it in a place where people don't visit frequently, and that's the reason why I thought it would be perfect to have it in Andy Brown East where people visit, and we could have that tribute for the veterans and be able to pass that on, the history, to the next generation for them to learn about it. And Mike and I mentioned to Mike not too long ago also, it would be great if we could just also add some sort of a video or some screen where we could constantly add the stories of veterans that the next generation could view. So I know that might be a little additional cost, but again, initially I was thinking that this could be something that comes out from Hot Fund because, again, then that fund will grow, but we just have limited uses, and this is a perfect use for that, I thought. So that's what I thought.
Thanks for your comments. It sounds painful, so thanks for volunteering.
It's painful.
Kevin?
John, I think it's a great idea. My mother's a veteran. Several in my family have served. I think honoring veterans is a great thing. So thank you for bringing that to the table. I think I would probably prefer hot funds as well, considering that is a growing revenue source for us as more of our hotels come online. So just my opinion, just to throw that in there, if that's what we are doing at this time.
And if I could add one more thing, and I know we have time, but the sooner we could get on this, the better. As you know, a lot of the veterans, we're losing them by numbers every year. It'd be really great if we could get this thing going and try to give them something sooner than later.
Don?
I would agree. I think the hot fund is where we ought to take it. We have, what, 831,000 sitting in the fund balance approximately right now. And I would say, do we just go ahead and earmark, 300,000 out of that and sort of
If that's what you.
cordon it off
If
for
that
this
is-
purpose? I mean, I don't know if that's the right number, but just.
Yeah, right. We can designate part of the funds, just like we do in the general fund for the Veterans Memorial.
So I'm hearing a strong yes from this side and up there. Anybody have a strong aversion to that? Brianna, Cliff, Bijou, Mark? You're on mute. There you go.
Do we have a projection on the hot tax in the coming years? I know we've approved a couple, and I think there's still one more under construction. Have we looked at that?
The one in perpetual construction?
Yes.
I'm looking to see if I can find the fund real quick.
I was looking to
If we earmarked $300,000 like Don mentioned, do we have a projection over the next few years of where that fund would be heading?
I think Kim's got the number for us.
I was just letting Mike know, it's on page 9.
Yeah, Mark, the hotel occupancy tax, I'll just go back to 2021, was $400,000. Now that we've had the additional hotels, and let's say we're operating, and that was kind of a little bit of pre-COVID still, but we're projecting 680 this year. So the number is growing. With the additional 110 to 120 rooms, let's say in another year, yes, that number will probably cross the threshold of $1 million. So the answer is yes, it's a growing number, and our incentive, we aren't incentivizing that many more hotels anymore. So we're able to retain a little bit more of that funding. Does that help you in that question?
Yeah, that really does, and I think that would be money well spent from the hot tax.
So I think I'm hearing a consensus that that's the direction that we're asking you to proceed, Mike.
We've got it.
Okay. So my question.
I'm sorry, Mayor, for clarity, is the number that we're looking at 300?
Put 300 in until we actually get to design.
Okay. Yeah, just one additional point of clarification. So the 250 from Irving, that was for the Gandhi monument that they had, not necessarily for the veterans. So it kind of we can change that number based on how that develops as we talk to the community.
Right.
I wanted to go back into debt service a bit, if you don't mind. You were talking about the 1.5 cents that we had been able to reduce or that we were looking at. Would we even need to consider putting that back on the INS for this coming year to prepare for Royal?
If that's a strategy that you wanted to use, the answer is yes. You would have to give us instruction to move the debt over from water sewer over to the general fund. And then what would happen is we would just identify, in this case, roughly what 1.5 cents worth, which is right at $1.5 million of that total debt would be paid by property tax. And then that would preserve, if that's the right word you want to use, the 1.5 cents. Then in 24, in the 24 budget, let's say you've issued the debt, when you go through consideration of Royal, we would move the water sewer back, and it would, that 1.5 cent would be taken up by the Royal debt.
So I have a question. For Kim. That if we did that 1.5 cents, what would that do to the overall property tax burden? We showed that we were going to be $99 down. What would that do to that number?
That was on the over 65. It's the 1.5 cent would basically make it neutral. So if you remember the $9.90 or whatever on that, it would make it neutral. So the tax burden for an average homeowner whose value still increased, they would be paying, according to the calculation, they would be paying no more in 23 taxes than they did in 22 taxes.
And of course, that's all that's all very dependent on what the final tax appraisals come out at the end of July.
Correct, and that's also on an average value. So some property tax owners may have a higher, some will have a lower, right? When you base it on an average. But for us, the number demonstrates that it would be neutral.
Is there any interest from the council to proceed with, or to study that more this next month? Don?
I'm in favor of studying it, but can we talk about logistically a little bit? So we have water and sewer debt currently that's paid out of water and sewer fund. And you were talking about shifting.
Yeah, the water and sewer debt, it is backed by property tax. So when the debt is issued, it's based on rates, but it has a property tax pledge.
Okay, got it.
And that's how the rates, right, that's how the interest rate comes down, because they know, hey, let's say you have a really wet summer and you don't have enough revenues to come in. Now, our retained earnings are so strong, that's a whole, right? But that's what it anticipates. It anticipates that if something goes awry in your utility, by having the property tax pledge, that you can make those payments. That's the only reason why we could even do this.
Okay. So how does it, well, I'm having trouble following the bouncing ball a little bit still, because I get it, that's what we've pledged. We've pledged tax revenues for the water and sewer debt, correct? We typically pay for those out of the water and sewer fund, though, out of the revenues generated by water and sewer.
That's correct, yes.
So I don't see where the 1.5 cent, why are we able to shift?
Because the debt has a property tax pledge, we can slide the water and sewer debt over. And for that portion that equates to the 1.5 cent, the property tax can pay for that portion. The water and sewer rates continue to pay the balance. It's a function of the way public finance works. It's not, right?
So we would use tax revenue to pay for that
for
piece.
Right, because that's the only way to
For this
preserve
Right.
the 1.5 cent if you chose to do that. There's no reason to move the water and sewer debt over unless you want to do something like this.
So the offset in the water and sewer fund is going to be, there'll be a buildup of revenues over there, though, right?
Well,
that would have gone to pay for that debt.
So it's because we issue certificate of obligations and not revenue bonds that we can do this.
Right.
And so when we issue that, the full faith and credit of the city is what's backing those bonds. So that's why we're out, what he's saying, that's how we're able to do it. If you recall, we've been talking about fully funding the capital replacement fund. Well, a piece of that is in water sewer also, which was not included in the business plan, which is not included in the debt rate or the water and sewer rates. So it would help preserve the retained earnings by doing that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
I'd be in favor of, to answer your question, of exploring this or discussing this further. I also long-term plans, like you mentioned those, the fire station and Royal. I certainly think it makes sense to borrow long-term for long-term capital projects like that, but at the same time, we are very fortunate, very blessed in this community to have sufficient resources. So I also like, in this situation, I like the idea of looking into other options or a hybrid of debt and using fund balance when these capital expenditures come up. I would like to dig into that further over the next few weeks also.
When we did this on Beltline 6 years ago, 5 years ago,
I think it was 17, 18.
5 years ago, it was, it really made it much more comfortable when we actually got ready to fund Beltline, because our construction costs had gone up considerably, and it made it much easier to, instead of having to come back and ask for additional funds, we were able to actually reduce the amount that we wrote the bond for.
Right.
In the back of my mind, with our inflation rate headed where it is right now, I've got a concern that 19 million may not be 19 million in 3 years or 2 years.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm sitting thinking. I'm just looking at it as kind of a hedge against the inflation that we're going to expect to see.
Can I have one more question?
You certainly can.
We defeased the bonds last fall, last summer, last fall, something like that was when the decision was made. We had already had built into INS tax rate to pay for that debt service for this year. However, we defeased them relatively early in the fiscal year. Is that right? What does that mean? What happened with those funds, or where do those? Does that make sense? The funds that we ended up not using.
So it will go back it'll go into the debt service fund balance.
Okay.
Which is necessary to meet our fund balance policy for the debt service fund. There was, in the previous year, we kind of used some of our fund balance
Okay.
of the debt service fund, so this will really replenish it.
Okay. So it's sitting in that fund balance and everything.
It will, yes.
And that was most of this fiscal year, right? I mean, because we defeased them.
It would have been the principal and interest payment related to that, to a portion
yeah,
of those
that makes
bonds.
sense. Okay.
And that's all.
Okay.
And just real quick, there was a positive side to the defeased bonds, and how much do you recall?
It's a little over $1 million.
Okay, so in the next 2 years?
Well, we had 2 years from the time that
So-
we closed, so
right,
we
so-
closed last fall, so.
Yeah, so I think it was in December timeframe. So 22 and 23, so this year and next year. And so we had to make a determination on that $1 million as well. And then because of the language, I think it was for streets. Well, it's general, isn't it? But to your point, Mayor, let's say Royal, and you wanted to use $1 million towards the design, or you wanted to use $1 million towards X related to Royal, that would be an appropriate use of those $1 million excess over the sale proceeds. So that's another option.
Bijou?
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to follow up on what Don said. Mike, we have, 3+ months left for this year. Do we have an amended budget update for the council coming up?
I'm going to bring that to the next council meeting in July, the first one.
So with that in mind, how are we looking at, I know you are quoting everything based on the FY23 is based on FY22 budget amended. So for this year's amendment, how are we looking at the budgets, including the fund that we are talking about here?
So what specifically, are you asking specifically?
The revenue and expenditure.
I'm not prepared to answer that tonight.
Okay.
In the most general sense, our expenditures are running under the amount budgeted, and our revenues are exceeding projected revenues in the most general sense. So that's what you'll be seeing in a couple of weeks. Weeks, July 12th, is that what you're planning? Did I just commit you?
I committed myself,
Oh,
so.
okay.
Brianna, did you have anything to add? You were, okay. Onward.
Yeah, so let me kind of summarize, and again, giving y'all an opportunity to kind of think through it a little bit. Tracy started off the presentation telling you what the parameters of the budget as far as the design is concerned. The budget as presented uses the 3.499. When you take out the capital transfer and you take out the enterprise solutions or the IT transfer, the overall base budget is only about 3% higher than last year's budget. This puts into place the top third, keeping us for two purposes. One is retention and the next is recruitment. And then we identified some consolidation of some of the funding sources, as Brianna observed, as far as, hey, things got moved over to the enterprise solution as an example, or to facilities or IMF as an example. So overall, the base service that we're looking at is to use the current level of service that we're providing throughout our operations. We have two positions that I'll call the new positions as far as personnel, co-compliance, and enterprise solutions. And overall, all that's done in the context of that 3% increase over last year's budget. We have the Water and Sewer Fund next Thursday night. No, this Thursday night. Well, it's next to me. It's Thursday night. Water and Sewer Fund. And in that fund, we'll be talking about the winter averaging and what that looks like. Then we don't meet again from a proper standpoint till July 28th. But on July 12th, the council will have in a work session item, they'll have your budget, because your budget's basically the same as it was last year, other than the holding what numbers y'all choose to put in. You've asked for the YMCA to come and do that presentation. So that evening, you'll be giving us specific direction as far as what's in or what's not, as far as the council budget is concerned. That's also an opportunity because you'll be talking about the hot funds while we heard you this evening, but that's also the evening you'll be talking about the hot funds because that's part of the council budget. Then, so what that makes, the 26th, I guess, is the next council meeting. So if there's something that is still on your plate that you're still wanting to talk, there's an opportunity. And then, of course, the 28th, as far as we'll have the final numbers from the appraisal district. We'll know what the actual calculation is related to what the property tax rates look like, what the average values are. We'll calculate, the top property tax payment for an average resident based on the average value and over 65. So all that information is forthcoming. Between now and then, if you have any specific questions or any particular questions, please get us to us. In the past, some of you have sent us some questions and we get the answer and we send it out to y'all so that you can kind of see that, knowing that you've had this since, I guess, Friday evening. And it's just an opportunity. This is the opportunity for you to ask the questions, say, you know what, I really don't want to have this in there, or I'd really like us to see us increase our programs in a particular area, or I'd like us to see something different. If we don't hear any of that from you between now and through the 28th, in essence, the budget that you're going to get presented to you that first week in August, is it the August 5th date?
Yes, August 5th is our charter requirement.
That's right. Will be a budget really similar to what you're looking at right here. We still have refinements to go through. That's just part of the natural process. And as you know, this year, I appreciate you indulging us to allow us to go in June, which put a tremendous amount of stress on the staff. But we'll be back in July in 23. Hopefully, we won't have anything that trips us up that says that we can't meet or anything along those lines. So that concludes this evening's presentation. And again, just whatever questions, and I know you have citizens' comments too. So.
Thank you. I did want to point out that item number 6 is going to be deferred until the July 12th meeting. And Brianna had something.
I have two clarifying questions. One is, I guess Tracy, you mentioned 2 positions, you just referenced them as well. And I think you mentioned there was 23 current open roles online or something around that number.
Yes.
So those that are already online are ones that were budgeted for in the past, right?
Yes, they are
Now-
included in our current year budget.
Right, and now we're just adding 2.
These are the 2 that we're talking about for code compliance and ES are net new.
Our
Yes.
net new, so that would make it 25. Is that correct? Or is that part of the 23?
No.
I just wanna make sure.
So the 2 that we're talking about tonight are not included on anything in the website.
Okay.
So if council approves those as part of the budget, they would be
October 1st.
October
That would be
1
okay.
for the new fiscal year.
Gotcha, okay. Thank you. And then the other question I had was, you mentioned as far as like programming, so before our, August or whatever, if we wanted to dive into, like, I'm just gonna throw out an example, it doesn't have to go in this direction, but like the senior center, right?
Right.
If we wanted to just look at that and make sure there's programming and our seniors are getting back to some normalcy, this would be the time to have that conversation. Not right now, but sometime before that August date.
Sure, I'll go ahead and just follow through with that. We had a specific discussion about the Mother's Day program. And we talked about, it wasn't necessarily been the one I would have chosen to, but those types of programs are what we're talking about are making sure we're bringing all those back. And so what we didn't do this year, okay, so what are we doing next year? I mean, that's what I've challenged Jessica to say, okay, really, let's make sure we bring those fully back to pre-COVID with what folks are comfortable with bringing back. That's also the combination of that dialogue that goes back and forth.
Right, and I think whether it's a senior center or other programming, I just wanted to understand what that looks like going forward. And I guess I will say for the senior center in particular, because I think there have been some questions, and so I think we're all still trying to get out of what was and going into what is, and so what does that look like to make sure that we're servicing all our citizens. So that's why I didn't just ask about the senior center there, when I also saw a shift in like community programs, what does that mean when I think people are trying to get back to some normalcy or their new normal, whatever it might be, right?
Right.
People want to get out and do things,
Right.
and that's
We have-
that's part of what makes Coppell an exciting community.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
We support that.
I think, Bijou.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions. One, to follow up on Brianna's point. During the COVID, we put 29 positions on hold. Are we talking about 23 positions out of the 29?
We're not talking about the 29. Those are done and gone. So the 23 positions that I referenced earlier that are posted on our website today that are vacant, that we are recruiting for, those are all positions that are funded and authorized in the current year budget, and we've had just employees leave the city post October 1. So those are separate and apart from anything that was related to those initial positions that were frozen. So again, those are all authorized budgeted positions in our current year budget.
Okay. My second question is, we do have this paper statement here, the compensation study. Are we going to have, I know we hired a consultant to evaluate the compensation. Are we going to have a discussion on the findings?
We're happy to answer any questions that you all have. The budget that is in front of you today in terms of the recommendation, it includes those adjustments to get us into that top third. So from a policy standpoint, that is kind of where we are making our recommendation. If there are specific questions that you have, we do have Mark Holcomb, who is the principal who's been working with us from Evergreen Consultants, who did the study. So yeah, we're happy to answer any questions that you have on that.
Yeah, I do have a question. Should I ask now or? Oh, okay. Yeah, so the compensation study, is that total compensation or just the salary?
Oh. Yep.
Thank you for having me. My name is Mark Holcomb from Evergreen Solutions. So in reference to the question just asked, we did look at total compensation. However, the exhibit that you're referring to there, that is an exhibit based on salaries only. So that top third there would get you into the top third of salary payments, of base salaries.
Did you look at other elements? For example, City of Coppell, if employee contributes 7%, city contributes 14% for their pension fund.
So we did look at that information. It will be available in a final report. But again, that's not for the specific exhibit that's shown here. That is not factored in there. But yes, we did look at those aspects as well of compensation so that we can report back on how the city is competitive in those areas.
You say you have those details?
We do, yes.
Okay.
And I will say, so from a recommendation standpoint, we're not recommending making any changes to the city's benefit package. So the salary component is where we are making those adjustments. So from a benefit standpoint, we were in a really strong position in terms of where we compared from the competitor marketplace. So we are not recommending any changes to the benefit package outside of just the base salary adjustments.
Yeah, that's what I was, the total package, you know, how the other cities are faring with us, including paying for the health insurance and so on and so forth. Do we have that details that you can share with us?
I don't have them ready to share tonight, but we do have that information. We've been working with Human Resources to make sure we're able to provide that information. And as was just mentioned, the city is in a competitive place. And so what we really identified as the priority that needed adjustment was to match that compensation philosophy statement of getting into that top third. And so that's where we did make the recommendations for adjustments.
Thank you.
So, Mark, hang on just a second, because I'm not sure if this is going to be a question for you or Tracy. I appreciated the study that you guys did, and like the summaries that you gave us today. You know, it's almost like every time I turn around, I'm finding another city employee has left to go somewhere else, whether it's, you know, Louisville or Flower Mound or somewhere. Are we comfortable that the proposed budget is going to take us to where we are not seeing our turnover be so high?
We're comfortable that the adjustments that are in the proposed budget will be competitive. Now, can I guarantee that we will not have employees leaving for other opportunities? The answer to that is no. But I will tell you, the areas in which we're experiencing the most turnover is our frontline employees. They represent about 50% of the employees who have left City of Coppell, if I date that back to January of 21. And so the recommendations that we are implementing as part of the budget here will address how we can become more competitive for those frontline positions. I know when we were in front of council several months ago as we kicked off the compensation study, we provided that heat map about where employees live, because this isn't necessarily about Coppell. This is about the regional marketplace. And so where employees live is a driver on what choices they are making in terms of where I'm going to work. And so while compensation is certainly part of that, we know that employees are living outside the city limits of Coppell. And so we think that the recommendations that we're including in our budget will certainly help us retain a lot of the employees that are leaving us today, based on the data that we have on who's leaving.
Thank you very much. Brianna?
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that, because my many years of service, we've had many of our staff live outside of Coppell, and they've been willing to make the drive because of our competitive packages, what we do to retain them, our culture, more than anything, our culture. And so I think maybe to follow up on what Bijou was saying, I would be interested in seeing how we, from a compensation package, not just salary, how we compare. And then, yeah, where are people going and why? Now, gas prices could be a reason, right? And so there are going to be things that are out of our control, and so maybe they are wanting to be closer to home. maybe because of having worked remotely for a while during COVID, maybe. So there's gonna be some outliers, but we've always actually been able to retain our employees, because Coppell is just a unique, different, great place to work, I guess, but.
Agreed. And so if I expand a little bit on the statistics and the data around the employees who are leaving Coppell. So if we date that back to January of 21 through September of 22. So it's a little, we're trying to, that's the time frame. So we've got 83 employees that are covered in that time period. Of that group, 31% of those employees left for either promotion or more money. We had 17% of them leave to work at a city that was closer to their home. I cannot move McKinney further away or move Coppell closer to McKinney. 16% of those are retirements. And so we're experiencing the Great Resignation just like many other organizations are. 19% of those were choices that employees made that resulted in them leaving our organization. And then kind of the remainder, the last 17%, is just kind of what I lumped into other. So my spouse got relocated to another community and we're moving to Granbury, and I'm unwilling to commute from Granbury. Or I just had a baby and I want to stay at home. We had 2 employees tell us that. So there's a number of different things that have driven that. Outside of additional dollars, none of them left because our medical plan was not competitive. None of them left because we were not competitive from a TMRS standpoint. None of those folks left really outside of the salary is more in community A, B, or C. Or I'm going to get a raise because I don't have to drive here and I can avoid tolls and all of that stuff. And so from a benefit package on what we're hearing from employees who are leaving, the benefit package is not the challenge that we're facing as it relates to choices that employees are making to go to other places. So that's kind of how we had that data helped inform us around where we needed to look.
Gotcha. I knew we had a lot from a retirement standpoint. I guess it's the 31% that I look at from the standpoint of opportunity for growth, promotion, more money is that piece, but.
Yeah, and traditionally, you are absolutely right that Coppell has been a place that people stay. And so from the standpoint of, is there opportunities for growth? There's opportunities for growth, maybe not necessarily my title and from a hierarchical standpoint, but I know that I'm going to be given opportunities to work on things that are going to stretch me. I know that I'm going to have opportunities to work on projects outside of my direct area. So those are things that traditionally have been something that we've groomed and has helped us retain. I will say as we get post-COVID and people are reassessing how they want to interact with their workplace, what that needs to look like. As people are leaving, we have less and less flexibility to provide some of those additional opportunities because we're literally just trying to keep everything from a program standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, moving forward, from a project standpoint, just moving forward. And so those are all from a retention standpoint, things that we're thinking about how we can take care of our employees today. And certainly the recommendation on our compensation study will certainly help that. Again, to the mayor's point, I don't think anything that any community does is going to guarantee that we don't have folks leaving. But I think we can become more competitive based on where we are today.
Thanks, Mayor. Tracy, you mentioned 17% retirement. I know earlier this year we offered a package for people to retire, and how many people take advantage of that?
Kim, do you have that number?
11.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Sorry, thank you very much for your input. We'll be looking to hear your report.
Absolutely.
John?
Thank you.
John?
Yeah. I have one question. I'm not sure if this is a sound right, but the compensation study competitor ranking that they were provided with, the first one talks about the current, our state of position today, and then the second part talks about after we make the recommended adjustment. Now, is that taken into consideration of what current other cities are, I guess other city have, or taking into consideration what they would be actually implementing on their part as well? In other words, even if we do make our adjustment based on this, we could still be back down on the numbers if other cities make their adjustment on their part as well too, right? Does that make sense?
We did include an adjustment for a projected salary movement for each of your peers into the next fiscal year. So we did not simply match you to what they're currently doing right now. We actually looked at projecting out what their salary increases might look like as a group. And so, yes, we do believe this would put you in the top third of salaries in the fiscal year 23.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have anything else? Don?
I just wanted to say I appreciate Mike and Kim and Vicky and Tracy and everybody on staff for the budget put together. I really do think it hits on a lot of different fronts. It's a minimal increase, expenditure-wise, minimal increase. We're fully funding these replacement fleets, and I know that comes out of the sales tax, but just going through the effort to make sure we do that. I actually think the increase is, if you look at the different sections, general government, by my very high-level math here, general government, and this is ignoring the transfer for the replacement, but general government is basically flat. Public safety was up 7%. I think that's a good number. Public works up 5%, and then cultural and recreational up a smaller 4.5%. And so I think that is a good sort of makeup of where the increases are. So I think the staff really deserves some accolades going through all these motions, giving us options on the debt service reserve fund, and what we can do going forward to try to smooth out not only fleet replacement, smooth out those ups and downs, but smooth out debt service or INS tax increases and decreases over time, just ideas to try to smooth it out for all the citizens. And at the crux of all of that is maintaining the level of service that we have in this community, which I think Brianna's the one that mentioned it a while ago. People choose Coppell for a reason, and service level is what it is. So I appreciate the staff doing everything they've done to present this budget for us.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, let's see. On our agenda, item number 9 is citizens' appearance. We don't have anybody else signed up. Billy, would you like to say anything as a closing?
We need to pick them all.
Thank you for your comments. With nothing else to come before this council, we are adjourned at 7:49 p.m.